Oh, somebody already clicked start the show. So welcome to the ones who already coming in. We are 3 minutes early. Welcome to the AI Cafe. We
Carmen, your audio is gone. Carmen.
Morten, do you hear me?
No, I hear you.
Lena, you
But
hear me?
I didn't hear you after you said welcome.
Okay.
So there's something happening with your your mic. It's me and you, Lena.
Yes. Okay. So welcome. Now it's time slowly. We are ready. People coming in. You're in the right place. We are a little bit early. We have to wait until everybody comes, but to take the time, it's always important that you take notice that the session will be recorded. No confidential information shall be shared in this cafe. In this cafe, the speakers express their personal view and opinions. This is not necessarily the official AI for Media project opinion. I am Carmen McWilliams, and I'm your moderator and cafe manager since more than 3 years. And again, welcome for joining today. The session today is called, Is Artificial Intelligence the Future of Wars? Do technologists and disarmament activists disagree on the use of lethal autonomous weapons? So for this, I invited, which is really nice that you are here today, Lene Grimstad, member of the board of the Norwegian Peace Association. Hello, Lene. Great. And Morten Irgens, he's the pro-rector of Christiania, and many more things you will soon hear. Hi, Morten.
Hello. How are you doing?
Great. Great. Great you're here today.
I'm glad the host is great. That's good.
Yes, and slowly also participants coming in. The cafe, as you know, is a networking place. You can meet all kind of Europeans and even internationals who are interested in artificial intelligence. You get a chance to share knowledge and experiences and meet stakeholders from the different areas of AI research and applications. And the idea is also that you may afterwards contact us if you have more questions. So feel free to write us. That would be nice. Today is a special session because we are going to have a chat, a real chat. This is not a PowerPoint presentation cafe today. It's more like interactive. And it will live also of all the questions coming in. So please, as always, send us over the chat. There is a chat and button where you can send your questions. It's really important. So if a question comes up to you, send it to us. I will read it to the speakers, and then we hopefully get answers. So also to let more people come in, I will now slowly introduce the speakers, or basically the guests, the main panelists. It's Morten Irgens. He's pro-rector von Christiana, co-founder, deputy chair, and director of the Confederation of Laboratories of Artificial Intelligence Research in Europe. That's Claire, and vice president of the Artificial Intelligence Data and Robotics Association, that's called in short ADRA, and a member of the board of the Norwegian Artificial Intelligence Research Consortium, that's in short NORA. So again, Morten will particularly focus on the what, why, and how of killer robots. So again, great you're here, Morten. So,
Thank you.
and then we have Lena. I also introduced Lena. Lene Grimstad, she is European coordinator of the Stop Killer Robots campaign and member of board of the Norwegian Peace Association. Lene will particularly focus on policy development and European state positions. So this is also great. Again, I welcome Lena.
Thank you.
Great. Yes, I think I want to take a little bit of time because I introduced once very long Morten in the cafe before in May, but you are new to us in the cafe, so I read a little bit your background. Lena has a bachelor BA in peace and conflict study, as well as an MA in society, science and technology in Europe. She has followed countries' work concerning lethal autonomous weapon system at the UN Weapons Convention since 2014 and has partaken on behalf of the Norwegian Peace Association since 2017. She has been part of the conception of the research group concerning autonomous weapons in 2018 and has led the group from the start. The group is small but has seen much activity. The Norwegian Peace Association is a traditional peace movement and Norway's oldest. So it's really interesting. You're a real expert and activist. So again, pleasure that you're here. But I will start today with Morten. Morten will be our first speaker, and then afterwards Lena will come in. Morten, so I will start. It is said that the arm race today is not bombs, but algorithms. What do you think about this?
Okay, so I'm the nerd and the geek in this discussion, and I can start out with being quite nerdy. No, today's arms race is not about algorithms. An algorithm is a precise description of about how to do things. It's like a detailed recipe for baking a cake, for instance, and the world is way too complex to be able to maneuver through it using an algorithm. It's not the way it happened. It's not the way modern technology works. It is actually statistics, complex systems, complex models, machine learning, and that's why it's hard to also depict how technology, software, etc., will actually behave in reality. So, but anyway, so as you know, that was the geeky part of me. I think I would like to say, okay, Lena is the disarmament activist, and I'm the tech activist, the artificial intelligence activist, the AI. I'm going to use the word AI all the time because it's in my head all the time. It means artificial intelligence. So I'm just going to say a little bit about tech and artificial intelligence and autonomy before, just to kick this discussion off. And I sometimes tell this story. There were two young fishes swimming along on a beautiful day in the ocean, and then they met an elderly fish who said to them as he passed by, "Hey guys, how's the water?" And they said, "Hi," and they kept on swimming. And then one of the young fishes turned to the other and said, "What's water?" Now, what's the story here? The story is the following. Technology is our water. we surround ourselves with technology as much almost as we surround ourselves with oxygen. And in the same way, we don't even notice that it's there until it disappears. It is technology that makes it possible. It's the reason why our societies aren't collapsing. It's also the way we are addressing future challenges. It's the way it's like technology. It's so important. You know, technology development is very fast. Or in some areas you could call it exponential. And any technology development seems to find a military use. Military technology, it often seems like it's the dark side of innovation, like the Mr. Hyde of Dr. Jekyll, if you want. And an exponential technological development gives an exponential weapon development. And many inventors and innovators, they thought, you know, of weapons positively in the past. They believed that they could remove the threat of war, or at least restrain its excesses, if they could find or invent the ultimate weapon that would be so bad and so horrible that nobody would dare to use it. Well, I don't believe in that. But what I do believe in is that technology changes warfare. And some technologies have created big changes, you know, the rifle, the railroad, the telegraph, the machine gun, the airplane and the tank and the atomic bomb and the information technologies. So what about artificial intelligence? So this is famous. All of you have heard this. The quote is the following: "The nation that leads in artificial intelligence rules the world." And who said that a few years back? Putin. And that may or may not be true, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So the ability to act autonomously, that's what it means to be human. Autonomy is an important area of artificial intelligence. The term autonomy has different meanings, but for engineers and technologists, it's usually mean that a machine or a computer program or can operate without human involvement. It just operates by itself. Many of the discussions and articles about lethal autonomous weapons talk about killer robots. It paints a picture of Terminator-like humanoids. It's science fiction images. It's like the Terminator, but it's not what lethal autonomous weapons really is about. Not today, and probably not never. So let's get to that. Let's talk about autonomy first. The autonomy in weapons, it's both narrow and low. It's narrow because it's often just pertaining to certain part of the system. So a flying drone can have autonomy in functions like taking off and landing, can be done by itself, for instance, or it can have autonomy in following a predetermined route, or it can have autonomy in deciding that route for itself, and it can have autonomy in deciding on using lethal force. So I don't care about, you know, the previous autonomous. We can discuss them too, but the core thing here is when a machine has autonomy in taking lethal decisions, and a weapon or a drone that has become that does that has become a lethal autonomous weapon. We say that it has autonomy in a critical function. The US military defines lethal autonomous weapon system as a system that can identify and attack targets without human intervention. Now, autonomy is therefore not a weapon in itself. It's an attribute. A flying drone could be autonomous. A boat could move and around in the ocean autonomously. A robot with legs can be autonomous, etc., 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 etc. So it is not a weapon, which makes it harder to talk about let's ban autonomous weapons. What are we actually banning then? And that is when the geek and the nerd say, what is this? It's not cluster bombs. We know what that is. So easy to understand. Or it's not anti-personnel mines. Both of these we have banned or have established international agreements of in the past. So what are we doing then? When we are not talking about a thing or a weapon, but a behavior. And Lena, you're the disarmament activist. What are we doing with this? Over to you.
Thank you. That's a very good bridge over to me. I appreciate it. So hi, everyone that's listening in. My name is Lena Grimstad from the Norwegian Peace Association, and I'm going to try to answer that question about what we are going to do. So thank you again for giving me that kind of a good solid background for me to build upon. So the title of my talk is Policy Development and European state positions, because I can imagine that many of you that are listening in are based in Europe, so you might be, particularly interested in European states and how they understand what policy is needed in order to kind of address the development of autonomous weapon systems. So I am coordinating a civil campaign that's called the Stop Kill Robots campaign. That's a campaign in the same way that we have had kind of disarmament or weapons control campaigns before for landmines and cluster munitions that Morten was mentioning briefly. So now we have 180 members of that campaign based in 66 countries, so it's growing. I just wanted to use 1 minute to kind of say that, so you kind of know a little bit of how I'm based in a way, and from what angle I'm addressing this issue. So members in this campaign is, the traditional ones, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, but also newcomers coming in. So it's the International Committee for Robot Arms Control, for example. So it's more also technologists joining at an early stage, kind of lining up and helping civil society or humanitarian organizations understanding the issue of autonomous weapon systems. I just wanted to say that. Okay, so I'm briefly then going to say how this all started in the United Nations, because the topic or the issue of autonomous weapon systems has been addressed at the UN since 2013. That was the year when the former UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial summary and arbitrary executions, it's a long word for his title, that was Mr. Christoph Heinz. He stood on the or addressed the Human Rights Council in the UN with his report on lethal autonomous robots. I think that was the term he used, and warned about that development in terms of human rights, and urged states to agree on a moratorium to stop kind of development until they had addressed the issue and what they would need to do in addressing autonomous weapon systems. And the next year, states started discussing autonomous weapon systems at the convention or under the Convention of Certain Conventional Weapons. So that's the CCW. That's a framework convention. I like to say, that you can think about it like the climate convention. So that's also a framework convention that can, like a framework for states to address climate change, right, and greenhouse gases, and how to reduce, come to terms with how they can reduce the greenhouse gases. So it's a framework convention, and under it you can come up with protocols. So for greenhouse gases, we have the Montreal Protocol, right, to ban or protect the ozone layer. So that's back in the 80s. and we have the Kyoto Protocol to reduce emissions, and we have the Paris Agreement. So it's a forum that, you know, it gives states a meeting place to address an issue. And for weapons, that is the Convention of Certain Conventional Weapons. So that convention already has protocols under it, like the agreements in the Climate Convention. So they have addressed before landmines, booby traps, incendiary or inflammatory devices, blinding laser weapons. So there's protocols there already. And since 2014, states have discussed whether or not lethal autonomous weapon systems, that's the term they're using, should be prohibited or restricted with an additional protocol under that convention. So since 2014, states have been meeting yearly, and since 2016, it's been what they call a group of governmental experts, that's the GGE. And that means that states are, you know, formally discussing the issue and bringing experts from their national capacities to this convention and bringing working papers with them. And they have a chair that's hosting these sessions. They're trying to look for convergence among these working papers. And every year, you know, when the mandate, when the session is done, to try to capture some of that convergence in a report, you know, because then everyone is agreeing, and in that way you are trying to stabilize the understanding of autonomous weapon systems. So this is back to what we said in the beginning, you know, what are we talking about? It's not like landmines and cluster ammunition that we knew because we had seen the humanitarian harm caused by those weapons on the battleground since the 1960s, right? So it's taken some time to kind of stabilize the issue. In the last 2 years, I think there's been a lot of convergence or stabilization of the understanding of autonomous weapon systems, and we're seeing like a two-tier approach or a way to address or answer to the issue, and what's kind of that two-tier approach looks like is first, like an understanding that there needs to be some limits on autonomy in weapon systems, and that weapon systems that are unpredictable are weapon systems that should not be used. Some would say prohibited, right? Or others that they should be regulated, and the other, so something should be are kind of unacceptable and shouldn't be used. So that's kind of the one tier or the way to answer this issue. And the other is, you know, to come up with rules that, in order to have enough human control about the remaining systems, to control the location, the duration of the weapon systems, what type of targets that the weapon systems, you know, can identify and attack, right? So that's kind of regulating the rest of them and prohibiting some of them. But this is kind of where we can see a civil society, you know, convergence, that's a possible way to answer to the issue of autonomous weapon systems. And but the big bet is that this convention is run on consensus, and that means that in order to capture this kind of convergence that we're seeing in the conversation, every country needs to agree. You know, so if one country says no, then it's a no. So that's a kind of a limitation of this forum, that it's run on consensus. The positive thing, you know, about it is that so then every country can be there. All of the kind of big military powers can be a part of the conversation because they have some control over the kind of where the conversation is, how far the conversation is able to go. So that it's positive to have everyone, you know, included in the conversation, but at the same time, you know, this is familiar with this forum that it stops at some point, that you're not getting the conversation, the convergence you need in order to bring the conversation forward and start negotiations towards something that's legally binding or an outcome like a treaty. So previously, you know, the landmine convention or cluster ammunition convention was taken out in separate treaty processes. The one was led by Canada, the other was taken out by Norway. And they got a lot of friendly states, you know, to come with them outside and they used the convergence that they had within this CCW, the convention, to not have, you know, a couple of states blocking the outcome that the majority wants, and they have succeeded outside of the CCW to kind of get the treaties that the majority wants, right? So we are kind of there now a little bit with the policy development. It's stabilizing. We're seeing more, you know, shared understanding about how this can be addressed and what a treaty could possibly look like. But then there's also, you know, the consensus demand of this forum that's also kind of slowing things down a little bit. We're not able to capture that convergence in a report as of now. So that's kind of an issue. And
Lena, can I just ask Lena, does that mean that the, what is it, CCW has worked, is a UN, has worked for 10 or 12 years without
yes,
getting much more than coming to some kind of common understanding?
yeah, so they have been discussing the issue of autonomous weapons since 2014. So we're now in 2022. So it's been, you know, a good number of years now. But, you know, if a kind of reading of it is, you know, that landmines was a concern in the 60s, and we achieved the treaty in the end of 1990, right? 96 or 97. So in a way, you know, former processes has also been long, even though when they kind of really started kind of running quickly, then it was like a success, and we said it went quick, you know, but we have had years and years, you know, to understand the issue. So in a way, to have I try to have like a kind of reading, even though, you know, as a person from civil society, I'm impatient as well. And I think that we, you know, when we can see a lot of stabilization in the conversation, I think we need to also have some courage, you know, and belief in norms and in strengthening international humanitarian law when it's needed, right? But at the same time, you know, it's been a lot of understanding that's been built. Kind of, we're working back to you, Martin, when you started. Like, what are we talking about here? So that has stabilized a lot now from how fragmented it was in the beginning. So, you know, countries have more. They can look at each other's positions now, and they can say, "Oh, we agree about this. We do not agree about this line, but this we agree about," right? And that wasn't possible before. It's only the last couple of years that it's possible to kind of have that way of you know, as comparing different state positions to each other. So that's great, I think now. So the last part of kind of my part then is the European states' positions. If anyone kind of wants to hear a little bit about that, I'm going to be brief. But the Stop Kill Robots campaign, so that's the civil society campaign on this issue, it has a state position monitor that's online that all of you can kind of look up afterwards if you want to kind of follow this a little bit. It's called Automated Decision Research as a website. Please feel free to contact me if you cannot find that and want to be able to access it. So there you can see, so it's a monitor of state positions, and 83 countries so far has stated their support for states to now negotiate a legally binding instrument to kind of have a treaty or a protocol as an outcome, saying that that's necessary, you know, to address autonomous weapon systems. And among those 83 countries, there's 8 European countries. It's Austria, it's Luxembourg, Slovenia, the Holy See, Malta, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and the Netherlands. So that's kind of the 8 European countries that has said legally binding instruments. So they kind of been very clear about it, stating it outright. And all of the other countries, they have either said it individually, or they said it in a joint statement, so that can have been delivered by the group of African states, for example. That's one of the 5 UN regional groups in the UN, or it can have been delivered by the non-alignment group, NAM, and they have signed on to that statement. So that's, you know, in total, we have 83 countries that have that we are kind of tracked as saying this. And then there's 33 countries that are kind of undeclared. They haven't declared their support for a legally binding instrument or a protocol as an outcome to this yet. And among those countries, 31 of them are European countries, right? So they have not, they haven't really decided, because it's been other options on the table as well. They said maybe we don't need something that's legally binding, maybe we can have a declaration, something else. But as the convergence now is also, it's growing in the group saying that they want something legal as an outcome, it's also creating a little anxiety, amongst the countries in the middle that hasn't really decided yet. Because they've been resting comfortably for some years with their let's hold on and see position. And now, as some European countries, as Switzerland and Netherlands, that has kind of said bye to that group this year and said that they want a legally binding instrument as an outcome, but that they're not opposed to that, they can kind of get a little anxious about their own position, right? So that's and I also just want to say, because I was forgetting that now, that the only statements that this monitor has included now are when states have given their statements at either the United Nations General Assembly or at the convention of certain conventional weapons. So they have kind of stated it there. So that means that there are also commitments that are made at domestic levels or at a national levels now that are not included. So there are more progressive positions at a national level that European countries have. So Belgium, for example, their parliament has voted unanimously back in 2018 in favor of a ban as an outcome. Finland also has had some motion at their national level in the last government platform. Germany as well, their previous foreign minister, so that was Heiko Maas in 2019 at a conference, I think. He also said that he wants to codify the principle of human control over all weapon systems internationally and thereby take a big step towards a global ban on fully autonomous weapon systems. So there's been, also raised by political leaders in other European countries, even though that position hasn't been delivered, at the UN yet. Sweden as well, their former foreign minister Ann Linde in Sweden has said that they want to put down a working group to find out how Sweden could best drive, or find concrete proposals to have an efficient regulation on autonomous weapon systems. So stuff has been said on national levels, even though it hasn't kind of materialized into a statement in the UN. So as a civil society, I'm kind of expecting that states are, that we will see more European states developing their national positions in the years to come. And I do think that some countries are a little anxious then also about being left in the group that hasn't really come up with their position yet. So I think that's good in a way to have some countries feeling a little, how are we gonna orient ourselves in the kind of policy landscape now. I also want to say, since I'm from Norway, that Norway also in their new political platform, well, it's 1 year old now, says that Norway is going to take the necessary initiative to regulate autonomous weapon systems. So Norway is also, needs to come up with find their own national position on this and find out how best to drive this. What's the necessary initiative? What does that look like? And in the European Union as well, I just want to kind of shout out and say that because your European Parliament has had 2 very strong resolutions on autonomous weapon systems with, I think the last one in 2018, 82% voted in favor of the MPs for a resolution saying that European countries should unite their position to to work, for a ban on autonomous weapon systems. So there's also kind of been strong movement in other organs or forums at the European Union level. And the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe as well, in 2019, also had like a declaration saying almost the same. So I think kind of it's encouraging, but at the same time, right, of the 33 countries that haven't come, that are kind of undecided, 31 of them are European, right? So I think there's, for me, from the civil society side, but I think also to throw it back to Morten, I think technologists have kind of a very important voice in this, because the European Union as well, as it's a broader picture, but kind of taking responsibility for technology, right? It's a broader frame here in a way, where you can throw in words as human dignity and protection of civilians and their rights, and all of these things in kind of the frame of developing technology and being kind of a leader in a way in setting those norms and standards, and being confident, in the fact that you can uphold those standards, even though technology is racing quickly. I think that's something that Europe perhaps should speak up more clearly about. Can I throw that back to you, Morten? I don't know if I was able to give you a break. I tried to.
Well, I hear that you sound quite cautiously optimistic, which I'm happy about, of course. But also, and you also say that it's taken like 10 years to arrive at the same pictures in the same modular understanding of the complexity here. And I do believe it's time to get that out of the committees and get it out in the public domain, in a sense, because ultimately this is about democracy. It's about making decisions about our own future, and I believe that technologists have a say here also, or their voices should be heard. I don't think technologists and scientists are very good at doing that. They like to stick their head into their particular area of research and stay there. But if I may, I think there are like 5 perspectives, and that only some of them are debated. The 5 perspective on lethal autonomous weapons, also known as killer robots, but lethal autonomous weapons are: number 1, it's a humanitarian law perspective. Number 2, there's a criminal justice perspective. Number 3, there's a moral perspective. Now, these 3 perspectives are repeated and repeated in the discussions. And of course, humanitarian law, it's international agreements, criminal justice, the same thing. But there are 2 more perspectives that I don't hear that much, and it's the operational perspective, and I think, and the global security perspective. So let me just briefly go through each of them. The humanitarian law perspective, this is international law stating that there are certain things we have as a planet. Most countries in the world have agreed on we should respect also in war, and that includes the principle of distinction. And we see now there's a war in Europe where we see Russia is not following the principle of distinction, but anyway, it is a very important part of the discussion of lethal autonomous weapons. And there are 2 perspectives on the 2 views on that. One is that lethal autonomous technology, artificial intelligence, is so great. They will make sure that we will have weapons that are perfect in distinguishing between civilians and combatants. And therefore, the rationale is that the technology will be better than humans in making those distinctions. Thus, it will be an improvement because we will have cleaner wars. There won't be civilians that will lose their lives, etc., etc. And the other perspective is that the use of technology will create use of autonomy in lethal functions will end up in a breach of humanitarian law, because the technology is far from good enough and is not and will never be able to distinguish between civilians and combatants. Now, and if it is lost a view, it presents a legal challenge to lethal autonomous weapons. But if it is the view that technology is so great that it will be able to create these kind of clean wars, I don't think there's any technologists that believe that AI is far from good enough and will never be that good. We can't even create autonomous cars driving down a highway without hitting somebody a deer running out in the so how can we create weapons that can manage handling this in the fog of war? Yeah, only if there's very limited use of it within limited domains. But anyway, that is one thing where technologists were saying this idealized picture of what technology is capable of is just somebody has been buying the ads for artificial intelligence, and they shouldn't. Now, then it's the criminal justice perspective. And that is that, well, criminal justice basically means that you should be able to attribute responsibility to an act. So liability for a criminal act is based on an assumption that the person who has carried out the act has autonomy and intention. That means that she must be free in her choices and know the difference between right and wrong. But autonomous artificial systems have autonomy without intention. They do not know the difference between right and wrong. They are therefore not themselves responsible. So who is then responsible? Who is responsible if an autonomous weapon commits serious offense? And I think technologists will be at loss here, but they know that some of the proposals are strange. Who will be court-martialed? Who will be dragged in front of the International Criminal Court? Some have said that the responsibility will have to be put on the company who created the weapon because they have created a faulty weapon. Now, autonomy isn't a fault. Autonomy is an attribute. And if you have autonomy, anything can happen. So, of course, who is the company who's responsible? The 300 software developers who were working on the programs? No. So we know this is obviously none of this. So lethal autonomy removes the ability to assign culpability, and it's kind of so that doesn't work either. So I understand that these things are reasons for saying we need to look at it differently. But then let me jump to the operational perspective. Here's more of the geek, really, in the nerd in me. Autonomous weapons have bugs. All complex systems have bugs. And if you have autonomy with bugs, they are dangerous to not only to the opponents, but to our own troops and civilians. Weapons that are deadly to the enemy is deadly to us. And if a bug is copied into other autonomous weapons, suddenly you can have a whole army with drones turning against yourself. Autonomous weapons are dangerous to our own troops and own civilians. It's too complex. They're too fast. They are intended to be fast. For instance, you would like to create autonomous fighter jets because human pilots cannot act fast enough, and they have all the G-forces, etc., etc. So you create enormously fast autonomous weapons. But if you have to imagine now, established strategies for crisis management point out that it is important to give both oneself and the other party plenty of time to interpret what's going on, because a war is also sending signals to each other. But autonomous systems, that will not be possible. And it is the speeds then that makes it impossible to, you have two autonomous fighter jets fighting against each other from two different countries. Who can predict the outcome of that? It's completely alien. So that's the other issue. Autonomous weapons are alien. The decision-making process, autonomous systems differ from human cognitive processes. This means that misunderstandings can occur because the systems behave in ways that are difficult or impossible for us humans to understand or predict. This is obvious for a tech geek, but it needs to be said. Autonomous weapons are unpredictable. It's a consequence of being autonomous. And they can be hacked. Complicated technologies have bugs, and such bugs can be exploited. So that's not good either. And autonomous weapons, they break the chain of command. So from an operational perspective, if you're a general, you will be very, very hesitant to rely on some autonomous weapon that is just flying around for 3 weeks before they do something. What is it going to do? But let me skip then to the geopolitical security perspective, because the global strategic landscape is changing rapidly, and it's driven by the change in technology. And autonomous weapons, they pose a threat to weapon containment. The technology that is used could be very simple, and it's hard to contain. It increases opportunities for terrorism. It's very hard to attribute to the, if you've seen already the drones attacking Kiev, where the Ukrainian says they are Iranians and the Russian says no, they're not. If they were autonomous in addition, where do they come from? Who did this? What happened here? It's very hard to do. But more than anything, autonomous weapons create drum roll, or listen. Here is something important. Let me put it another way. The reason why United States pulled out of Vietnam, the reason Russia pulled out of Afghanistan, was that the coffins started to come home. Now, if you can fight a war without soldiers, the threshold to start a war or to engage in conflict is much lower. And it becomes a temptation to use them because they cost money. It's technology, but they don't cost your own lives. For that reason also, conflicts will get longer. Autonomous systems are fast and we get faster battles, but we also get longer conflicts. They can, you can just keep this going on forever because you don't have coffins coming home. But also, autonomous weapons reduces the democratic control of wars. Democratic elected institutions are a deterrent to acts of war, but the fewer humans that are involved in a war, the fewer decision makers are involved in that war, the less oversight you have. And of course, the next thing is you can have remote conflicts. You can have a conflict at the other end of the world, and all of this is weakening the strategic stability in the world. It's a slippery slope, increasingly going downhill. With each step, the risk of slipping and sliding into a dystopia that is like science fiction-like dystopia is increasing. So here is the important point. Remember that I argued against the idea that AI is so good that autonomous weapons will be better at distinguishing combatants from civilians. I said, and it's not good enough, so that's not an argument. But assume that was correct. What would happen? That would be a nightmare. Could you imagine something more scary? How would the geopolitics look like if states could engage in conflicts without own casualties and with a guaranteed full adherence to humanitarian law? I mean, you know, that is a crazy image. So I'm going to end my 5 points with a fifth, and that's the moral perspective, because I mentioned the humanitarian, oh man, I don't even remember them. The moral one is the disgust perspective. From a moral perspective, it would be inhumane and abhorrent if a machine were to decide whether life could be taken. That's the moral perspective. That's the basics. We can put the details of international law and all these other things to the side and talk about what we find unacceptable. There's nothing new in that. It's always been the starting point for laws, and not the least laws of war. The moral principle is that one that may be that principle is one that may be maybe most difficult for technologists to relate to. It's kind of a bit alien, but it's not deduced from something. It doesn't follow something. It's like an axiom. It's something that we all have to agree with. So the sentence, the decision of taking a human life can only be taken by another human. Is that a self-evident truth? No, of course not. But the sentence, the decision of taking a human's life should only be taken by another human. It's not a self-evident truth. I'm not a philosopher, and I do not know how to discuss it, but I think it's not a self-evident truth, but a principle that we as humans can agree on and put into law, make it a law. So why has the world previously agreed to ban chemical weapons, biological weapons, exploding bullets, anti-personal landmines? Because they create disgust in us. They are evil in themselves. They are abominable. And that is what killing machines are. Autonomous weapons that make decisions of taking human lives is on that level. They are disgusting. And as humans, I think we can rip away the hat of being a technologist and say, as a human, we cannot go there.
Yes.
I think I stopped there.
Yes, I want to also say something, and I have questions from the audience. They want to say also something, so I throw mine in, and then I will read you from the audience, from the participants. My question is to you, Lene. I mean, since 2013, 2014, there tries to be a treaty consensus that we want to ban these autonomous weapons. But isn't there maybe a question that this consensus will never come? I mean, there will be always, I mean, this has to be a change in the way to make global decisions, not only autonomous weapons, but also with climate change. Don't you talk about this, like you need another way of making decisions?
Yes, thank you. That's a good, very good question. And it's also, you know, it's something that's kind of argument, counter argument type of discussion around it, because in one way, of course, you want as many stakeholders, you know, around the table as possible. You know, when you want to address a weapon system, but at the same time, we do know that that is not normally how we kind of have success when we are addressing weapon systems. So the way that it has been done often, especially in the forum that they are now, that's kind of run on consensus, is that when they have enough convergence in the conversation, when they have like a majority of states, but they're not getting anywhere within the framework convention, then previously we've had a group of willing states, taking it out and starting a parallel, like a separate treaty process outside. And then, of course, kind of your question, then you can say, well, but are we not risking then that we're not getting everyone on board? And is that something we can be confident about, setting standards for ourselves? And if the development by kind of bigger players are still kind of going as normal. But previously, an example that I always go to with the landmine process. I was 7 years then, so this is what I read about, and not something I experienced. But when Canada took landmines out of this convention and invited supporting states to work with them on coming up with a text. Even though, for example, the United States didn't sign this treaty, they haven't signed this treaty, but they were participating in the work on that treaty up until the end, So you can always have a lot of countries with you, and they can give input and it kind of continue to give input to the treaty text,
Yes.
And why I kind of went for the landmine as an example is this year in April, or if it was March, President Biden in the US said that even though the US hasn't signed the anti-personnel mine convention or treaty, they are in practice now aligning their policy with every requirement in that treaty, right? So it's when you're creating a norm, it has an effect. It's kind of stigmatizing that weapon system, and we can see, that of course you can then say that your good and responsible actors don't use them then, right? Even though you haven't signed on that treaty. I think we should be confident looking back at other treaties that they do have an effect, even though not every state is participating. We're not going to get every state participating in this treaty. Yeah.
Yes, I agree, and I want to now go to other questions. It's basically from Pavel. What if an army doesn't need 100% perfect, autonomous, and safe systems? After all, each army must count with possibility of friendly fire, which happens in conflict, and it doesn't lead to ban of conventional weapons.
I didn't understand it. After all,
each army, for example, must count with possibility of friendly fire, which happens in conflict, and it doesn't lead to ban of conventional weapons.
I mentioned that not from the perspective of banning it. I mentioned that from the perspective of that there were operational issues, and they add up. This is one of many operational issues that would make where you don't want to break the chain of command, so to say, and at least if a general starts to make autonomous weapons, will make that judgment. To which degree do I trust this? So I agree. Armies they are used to friendly fires, etc., etc. But the consequence, let's say you have 500 drones, autonomous drones you use in an attack, and it turn back at you. The consequences of that are much bigger than some friendly fires usually.
Yes. Okay, and then here Damian Swittering. What worries me is that we are nowhere near autonomy in AI. That's what you also said before. But we seem to rely on it anyway. For Google Maps, that is annoying, but for weapons, it's disastrous. What do you think? We have seen it in the stock trade.
Autonomous stock trades. No, it's we do use autonomy that is far from perfect and can never be perfect, because autonomy by definition means it's not perfect. So I do agree it would be disastrous in weapons. And my point with bringing out the 5 dimensions there is that it would be disastrous for so many different reasons. So you can look at each of them and agree or disagree, but the totality of it is absolutely horrendous.
Yes. And here comes Peter. Thanks for the discussion. It was an early question. I'm wondering what it is and what is not autonomous weapons. An example, some years ago, a terrorist driving a truck killed many people gathered for July 14th celebration. Would this truck have been autonomous? Would it qualify as an autonomous weapon?
If it's driven by a person, no, it's not autonomous. But the human,
yes. The truck, if the truck would have been autonomous,
yeah, that would be a autonomous weapon.
Yeah,
I mean, any that's the point. It's not. It's an attribute. So it could be a frigate, a submarine, a drone, a fighter jet, a missile. All of these can have autonomy, and they often have a lot of autonomy. But the autonomy in making the decision of actually hitting the target, that is the lethal autonomy, which we don't want.
Yes. I also have to give you compliments. Somebody had to leave. It's a great, excellent chat. So this is the comments from the audience. Excellent.
Thank you. That's nice.
So maybe you want to say something. We're going towards 4 o'clock. We are going to the end of today's discussion, even though I could go on for next 2 hours. I have about 10 questions more here, but for myself, but I stop it.
The point here is that it's a way too complex issue. That's the issue here now. It has so many dimensions and so many strange things to it that it requires that we get our shoulders down and we spend a lot of time starting to mapping this out and figure it out. And we need to bring it into the democratic debate. It cannot be held behind closed committee doors. And that's back to you, Lena. How would you like it to go?
I think it's I just wanted to point to or suggest if you guys are interested, there's a short documentary out that is doing precisely that, trying to reach more out to the public. So it's kind of trying to bring a topic or an issue that sounds very technical into kind of addressing us as human beings, you know. So the short documentary is called Immoral Codes, and you can look it up. It's 18 minutes, it's 20. It's made by Amnesty International together with the Stop the Robots campaign, and it's kind of it's a good way, I think, conversation starter for citizens, right, to think about to think more about autonomy in weapon systems. And we are, you know, seeing a new generation now of weapon systems being deployed, right, with increasing levels of autonomy in them in the battle field. So I think it's great, you know, to have the public as well engaging in that, to put some pressure, you know, because now countries need to develop their national positions, and European countries especially. So yeah, I would leave you with that, I think.
Great. So I noted down Immoral Code, so I'm going to check it. Great. And thank you again for joining today, Lena and Morten, and everybody out there who was with us. Thank you, and have a nice afternoon. And I hope I can join also your initiative, but I will. Yes.
Thank you for having us on your cafe.
Yes. See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.